Welcome to sleepless ancient Odyssey. The day is done. It is time now to let the noise of your world fade into silence. Find your most comfortable position, and for the next few moments, simply relax. Tonight's Odyssey is about to begin tonight. Our journey takes us to the heart of the Ottoman Empire, into the sacred and forbidden chambers of the Imperial Palace. We will witness a life shaped by sacrifice and power. We will walk among the silent guardians of sultans and their families, and we will seek to understand what it meant to live between worlds. Neither fully man nor woman, neither slave nor free, yet wielding influence that could topple empires. This is not merely history. This is the story of survival, ambition, and the peculiar kind of power that emerges from loss. Whether you are here for a story to captivate your mind, or a grand narrative to accompany you to sleep, your journey starts now. If you enjoy these odysseys, subscribe and join us every time we travel to the past. Now, let us begin. The boy is perhaps 7 years old when his life changes forever. He does not yet know the word that will define him, does not understand the path that has been chosen for him by forces far beyond his control. He knows only that strangers have come to his village, that his mother weeps in a way he has never heard before, and that his father will not meet his eyes. The year is sometime in the 16th century, though exact dates matter little in the borderlands of the Ottoman Empire. His village sits in the Caucasus Mountains, or perhaps in the Balkans, or along the shores of the Black Sea. The empire is vast, stretching from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, from the shores of North Africa to the mountains of Persia. And from this vast expanse, it draws its most unusual servants. The men who come are not soldiers, though they carry the authority of the Sultan. They are agents, procurement officers of a sort, searching for boys with particular qualities. Fair skin is preferred, intelligent eyes, a certain delicacy of feature. The boy possesses all of these, though he does not understand why the strangers study him so carefully, why they examine his hands and his face as one might examine a horse at market. His mother's tears are not uncommon in these villages. The devshirme system, the gathering of children, has operated for generations. Some boys are taken for the Janissary Corps to become the Sultan's elite soldiers. Others are selected for palace service. And a very few, are marked for a different destiny entirely. The boy does not scream when they take him. He has been taught obedience, taught respect for authority. He walks between the strangers, away from the only home he has ever known, and he does not look back. Looking back, he has learned already, changes nothing. The journey to Constantinople takes weeks. The boy travels with perhaps a dozen others, all roughly his age, all silent with the shock of displacement. They move through mountain passes and across fertile plains, through cities that seem impossibly large and strange. At night, they sleep in caravanserais, those great roadside inns that dot the empire's trade routes, and the boy lies awake, listening to languages he does not understand, smelling spices whose names he does not know. Constantinople, when they finally reach it, defies comprehension. The city sprawls across 7 hills, just as ancient Rome once did, straddling the narrow waters that separate Europe from Asia. Minarets pierce the sky like fingers pointing toward heaven. The great dome of Hagia Sophia, converted now into a mosque, dominates the skyline, and rising above the Golden Horn, overlooking the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara, stands the Topkapi Palace, the heart of Ottoman power, the center of an empire. The boy and his companions are taken not to the palace itself, not yet, but to a house in the city where other boys already wait. Here, the selection becomes more refined. Palace physicians examine them, noting the straightness of limbs, the clarity of eyes, the evenness of teeth. They are being evaluated like precious commodities because that is precisely what they are. Some boys are sent elsewhere, reassigned to other forms of service. But the boy with the fair skin and intelligent eyes remains. He has been chosen for the highest service of all, though he still does not understand what this means. Not yet. The procedure itself will come later, performed by specialists who have perfected their craft over generations. It will be swift, as such things go, though the recovery will be long and painful. But before that moment arrives, there is preparation. There is training. There is the slow, careful process of transformation that will remake him into something the Ottoman world has a very specific word for: a harem, a palace eunuch. Let us pause here, in this moment before the irrevocable change, and consider what awaits him. For the life of a eunuch in the Ottoman court is not what outsiders often imagine. It is not simply a story of mutilation and servitude, though both of these elements are undeniably present. It is a story of adaptation and survival, of finding power in powerlessness, of creating a life within the most restrictive of circumstances. The Ottoman Empire has inherited and perfected the practice of employing eunuchs from earlier civilizations, from Byzantium, from Persia, from the ancient courts of the East. But the Ottomans have systematized it, creating an elaborate hierarchy of eunuch service that operates according to strict rules and customs. There are white eunuchs, typically from Christian regions of the empire, and there are black eunuchs, brought from Africa via the slave trade. Each group has its own domain, its own responsibilities, its own ladder of advancement. The boy with his fair skin will become a white eunuch. His domain will be the outer palace, the administrative heart of the empire, where he might eventually serve grand viziers and imperial officials. Or, if he shows exceptional promise, he might be transferred to serve in the inner palace, in the proximity of the sultan himself. But there is another possibility, a more mysterious and perhaps more powerful role. If his qualities prove truly exceptional, he might be designated for service in the harem, not the harem of popular imagination, that fantasy of Western Orientalism, but the actual harem, the private quarters of the imperial family, guarded and administered by black eunuchs under the authority of the Kisler Agassi, the chief black eunuch, one of the most powerful officials in the entire empire. The operation takes place in a medical chamber attached to the procurement house. The boy has been prepared for days, his diet controlled, his body cleansed according to strict protocols. He has been told, in gentle terms that nonetheless convey the finality of what is about to happen, that he is being given a great gift. He is being elevated above ordinary men. He is being made suitable for the most sacred service in the empire. He does not feel gifted. He feels terrified. The surgeon who performs the procedure has done this hundreds of times. There is a technique to it, a precision required to ensure survival, for death from such operations is not uncommon. Too much blood loss, infection, fever. Any of these can claim a boy's life in the days following the surgery. The surgeon works quickly, assisted by two others who hold the boy still despite the leather strap clenched between his teeth. The pain is indescribable. It is a pain beyond pain, a tearing wrongness that seems to extend beyond the physical body into some deeper realm of violation. The boy does not remember much of it afterward. Mercy, perhaps, or simply the mind's way of protecting itself from unbearable memory. The recovery takes weeks. The boy lies on a low bed, fever burning through him in waves. He is tended by older eunuchs, men who have survived this same ordeal, who speak to him in soft voices and apply the poultices and herbs that will prevent infection. A tube has been inserted to keep the urinary passage open as he heals, and the pain of this is sometimes worse than the original wound. Many boys do not survive. Perhaps 1 in 3 dies in the first month, their bodies succumbing to infection, or blood loss, or simply the shock of trauma. The boy, though, possesses a stubborn vitality. He endures. He survives. As his body heals, something else begins, a different kind of transformation, slower and more subtle. His voice, which had been on the verge of deepening, remains high and clear. His body, deprived now of the substances that would have driven it toward manhood, begins to develop differently. His hips widen slightly. His facial features retain a softness, an almost feminine delicacy. He grows tall, as many eunuchs do, but without the muscular development that would have come with maturity. He is becoming what he will remain for the rest of his life. Neither man nor woman, but something other, something in between. A creature of the threshold. During his recovery, the boy, no longer quite a boy, not yet whatever he will become, begins his education. For service in the Ottoman palace requires more than mere physical presence. It requires skills, knowledge, discretion. He must learn to read and write, first in Turkish, then in Arabic and Persian, the 3 great languages of the Islamic world. He must learn courtly manners, the elaborate protocols that govern every interaction within the palace walls. He must learn to walk silently, to observe without appearing to watch, to hear secrets without remembering them unless remembering serves his purpose. Older eunuchs serve as his teachers, initiating him into the mysteries of palace life. They teach him that survival depends on three things: invisibility, indispensability, and information. Make yourself invisible when power is being contested. Make yourself indispensable to those who hold power. And always, always know more than you reveal. There is a language within the palace, they tell him, that has nothing to do with words. A language of gesture and glance, of positioning and timing. Stand too close to the sultan and you presume. Stand too far and you insult. Speak before being addressed and you transgress. Fail to speak when expected and you offend. The young eunuch must learn to read this language as fluently as he reads Arabic script. That he learns also about the structure of the palace itself, that vast complex of courtyards and chambers, gardens and treasuries, mosques and kitchens. The Topkapi Palace is not a single building but a city within a city, enclosed by walls that separate it from the bustling streets of Constantinople. It is divided into courts, each more exclusive than the last, each requiring higher levels of clearance to enter. The first court, the court of the Janissaries, is semi-public, accessible to petitioners and officials. The second court, the court of the Divan, is where the business of empire is conducted, where the Imperial Council meets beneath the shadow of the Gate of Felicity. The third court, accessible only to the Sultan's inner circle, contains the Sultan's private chambers, the audience hall, the treasury, the sacred relics of Islam. And, beyond even this, separated by another gate and another layer of exclusivity, lies the harem, the private domain of the imperial women, the Sultan's mother, his wives, his concubines, his daughters, his sisters. The young eunuch, recovering still from his surgery, does not yet know which of these domains will become his world. That decision will be made by others, based on assessments of his character and capabilities that he himself may not fully understand. What he knows, what all eunuchs know, is that they occupy a unique position in Ottoman society. They are slaves, yes, legally the property of the Sultan, but they are slaves who can rise to positions of extraordinary power. They can accumulate wealth, own property, maintain their own households. Some eunuchs become so powerful that they effectively control access to the Sultan himself, and controlling access to absolute power is itself a form of absolute power. This paradox, slavery that contains the possibility of power, will define his life. He is less than free, but potentially more than most free men. He has lost something fundamental, but this loss opens doors that would otherwise remain forever closed. As his body heals and his education progresses, the young eunuch begins to understand something crucial. What has been taken from him is also a kind of freedom. He will never marry, never father children, never inherit land or title through family connections. He stands outside the normal structures of male ambition and rivalry, and in standing outside these structures, he becomes uniquely useful to those who operate within them. 6 months after his surgery, he is judged ready for assignment. He has survived. He has learned. He has demonstrated the discretion and intelligence that palace service requires. A decision is made in rooms he will never enter, by officials whose names he will never know. His assignment is determined. He will serve in the third court, in proximity to the Sultan's person. He will be a page, initially performing humble tasks, maintaining the Sultan's wardrobe, preparing his chamber, attending to his needs. But if he proves himself, if he demonstrates loyalty and capability, he might rise. He might become an aga, a chief with authority over other eunuchs. He might enter the Sultan's innermost circle. The young eunuch receives this news with the same silent acceptance that has characterized his entire journey. What choice does he have? What choice has he ever had? But beneath the acceptance, something else stirs. Not quite hope, but perhaps its cousin. A sense that this life, strange and circumscribed as it may be, nevertheless contains possibilities. Dawn in the Topkapi Palace arrives with the call to prayer echoing from 100 minarets across Constantinople. The young eunuch, who has been given the name Hüseyin, his birth name forgotten, replaced by something more suitable, rises from his sleeping mat in the dormitory he shares with 24 other palace servants. He performs his ablutions with water from a copper pitcher, washing in the prescribed manner, and joins the others for morning prayer in the small mosque attached to the service quarters. Prayer in the palace is not optional. It is part of the rhythm that structures every day, marking time in a place where time often seems to have little meaning. The eunuchs pray together, their high voices blending in the recitation of familiar verses, finding perhaps a moment of peace before the day's demands begin. After prayer comes breakfast: flatbread, olives, white cheese, perhaps some honey if the season is right. The eunuchs eat quickly and in silence, observing the protocol that governs even the most mundane activities. Then they disperse to their various assignments, becoming part of the vast machinery that keeps the palace functioning. Hüseyin's morning task is to prepare the sultan's outer garments. This is a responsibility he shares with 3 other eunuchs, each specializing in a different aspect of the royal wardrobe. One maintains the sultan's turbans, those elaborate constructions of silk and jewels that can weigh several pounds. Another cares for his weapons, ceremonial daggers, jeweled swords that are works of art as much as instruments of war. A third manages the sultan's footwear and outer robes. Hüseyin's specialty is the kaftans, those long robes of silk and brocade, embroidered with silver and gold thread, that represent the ultimate in Ottoman luxury. Each kaftan is a masterpiece, taking months or even years to create, and Hüseyin's responsibility is to ensure they remain perfect, aired regularly to prevent moth damage, stored properly to preserve the fabric, ready at a moment's notice for the sultan's use. The work requires attention to detail bordering on obsession, a loose thread, a fading color, a moth hole. Any of these could reflect poorly not just on Hüseyin but on the entire palace hierarchy. Perfection is not simply expected. It is demanded. As he works, carefully examining each kaftan, Hüseyin is aware of the larger dramas unfolding around him, though he does not directly participate in them. The palace is never quiet, never still. It buzzes with intrigue and ambition, with rivalries and alliances that shift like sand in the desert wind. The Sultan, let us call him Suleiman, though Hüseyin will serve several sultans in his lifetime, is the axis around which everything revolves. His favor can elevate a nobody to Grand Vizier. His displeasure can send a powerful official to the executioner's block. And because his attention is finite, because there are only so many hours in a day and so many issues that require his judgment, controlling access to him becomes critically important. This is where eunuchs derive much of their power. They are the gatekeepers, the intermediaries, the ones who decide who sees the sultan and when. An official who wishes to present a petition must go through them. A foreign ambassador seeking audience must negotiate with them. Even the sultan's own family members must observe the protocols that eunuchs enforce. Hüseyin, as a junior eunuch, does not yet exercise this kind of power, but he sees it in operation. He watches the more senior eunuchs, observing how they navigate the treacherous waters of palace politics. He learns by watching, by listening, by remembering. Midday brings another break for prayer, and then lunch, a more substantial meal of pilaf, vegetables, perhaps some lamb if the palace kitchens have been generous. The eunuchs eat in their designated areas, maintaining the separation that keeps the palace's complex hierarchy functional. There are white eunuchs and black eunuchs, senior eunuchs and junior ones, those who serve the sultan directly and those who perform more menial tasks. Each group has its place, its proper sphere, and crossing these boundaries requires careful navigation. The afternoon is often when the real business of the palace unfolds. This is when the Imperial Council meets, when decisions are made about war and peace, taxation and justice, appointments and dismissals. Hüseyin, going about his duties in the third court, can sometimes hear the murmur of voices from the council chamber, though the words themselves are indistinct. He knows better than to try to listen too closely. Curiosity in the palace can be fatal. Instead, he focuses on his work. There are always kaftans to maintain, always some aspect of the sultan's wardrobe that requires attention. The work is never truly finished, and this suits Hüseyin well. It gives him purpose, structure, a sense of usefulness that helps him forget, at least for moments at a time, what he has lost in the late afternoon, When the day's formal business has concluded, there is sometimes an opportunity for recreation. The palace has gardens, beautiful spaces where fountains play and flowers bloom in carefully tended beds. Eunuchs are permitted to walk in certain of these gardens during designated hours, and Hüseyin often takes advantage of this privilege. The gardens offer something he finds nowhere else in the palace: a sense of peace. Here, among the roses and jasmine, listening to the water splashing in marble fountains, he can almost pretend he is somewhere else, someone else. He can almost forget the walls that enclose him, the circumstances that define him. Sometimes other eunuchs join him, and they talk in low voices about palace gossip, about the subtle shifts in power they have observed, about which officials are rising and which are falling. These conversations are never innocent. Information is currency in the palace, and even casual gossip can be valuable if properly deployed. Hüseyin learns to participate in these exchanges carefully, revealing little, gathering much. He is building a network, establishing relationships that might prove useful later. Every eunuch understands this necessity. Isolation in the palace is dangerous. One needs allies, patrons, people who have reason to protect you. Evening brings the final prayer of the day, and then dinner, and then the retreat to the dormitory. But the day is not quite over. Often, especially if the sultan is hosting visitors or conducting evening audiences, the eunuchs must remain available, ready to be summoned at a moment's notice. Sleep comes in fits and starts, always with one ear attuned to the possibility of being called. This is the daily rhythm of palace life, repeating with minor variations day after day, month after month. To an outsider, it might seem monotonous, even oppressive. But for Hüseyin and his fellow eunuchs, it is something more complex. It is constraining, yes, but also oddly liberating. The rules are clear, the expectations known. One understands exactly what is required, and the consequences of failing to meet those requirements are equally clear. In a world of absolute hierarchy, where one's position is fixed and certain, there is a strange kind of comfort. Hüseyin does not have to wonder about his place in the world. He knows it, he lives it, and within those confines, he begins to discover small freedoms, small areas of agency. He befriends a scribe in the palace library, a man who teaches him the finer points of calligraphy and introduces him to poetry. He learns to appreciate the beauty of words arranged on paper, the way meaning can be layered beneath meaning, how a simple verse can contain entire philosophies. This becomes a private passion, something he pursues in the hours between his duties. He also begins to save money. Eunuchs receive wages, modest but regular, and Hüseyin spends little of his. He has no family to support, no household to maintain. The palace provides his food and lodging, his clothes, everything he needs. So his wages accumulate coin by coin, creating a small reserve of financial independence. Years pass in this rhythm. Hüseyin grows older, more skilled, more confident in his role. He is no longer the terrified boy who arrived at the palace gates. He has become what the empire needed him to become: a perfect servant, invisible when invisibility is required, indispensable when action is needed. And then, 10 years after his arrival, an opportunity presents itself, an opportunity that will change everything. The opportunity comes, as such things often do, through tragedy. The sultan's chief steward, a senior white eunuch who has served faithfully for 20 years, dies suddenly. Heart failure, the palace physicians determine, though there are whispers of poison, of rivalries taken too far. In the palace, death is never simple, never without political implications. The death creates a vacancy, and vacancies create opportunities. The position of chief steward is not the highest rank a eunuch can achieve, but it is significant. The chief steward manages the sultan's private chambers, oversees the corps of junior eunuchs who serve there, controls access to the sultan during his private hours. It is a position of trust, of proximity to power. Hüseyin is not the obvious candidate. There are eunuchs more senior than him, men who have served longer and cultivated stronger patronage. But Hüseyin has advantages that are less visible but no less real. He has made himself useful without making himself threatening. He has cultivated relationships without creating enemies. And he has impressed the right people with his discretion and competence. The selection process is opaque, conducted in private councils where Hüseyin has no voice. But he learns through the palace's elaborate information network that his name is being considered. This knowledge is both thrilling and terrifying. Advancement is what every palace servant desires, but with higher position comes greater scrutiny, greater danger. The more visible one becomes, the more one risks becoming a target. 3 days after the chief steward's death, Hüseyin is summoned to the chambers of the Topkapi Palace, the chief white eunuch, the highest-ranking white eunuch in the palace hierarchy. This official, a man perhaps 60 years old with the soft features and tall frame characteristic of those castrated young, regards Hüseyin with eyes that seem to see everything. "You have served well," the Topkapi Palace says, his voice high and clear. "You have been observed. You have demonstrated qualities that are valued." Hüseyin bows deeply, says nothing. Speech at such moments is dangerous. The Sultan requires a new chief steward. The official continues. The position demands absolute loyalty, perfect discretion, and tireless service. "Do you believe yourself capable of providing these things?" "I exist only to serve," Hüseyin replies, using the formula he has learned, neither accepting nor declining, simply affirming his fundamental purpose. The Topkapi Palace nods, satisfied. "You will assume the position beginning tomorrow. Your duties will be explained to you by those you will now supervise. Remember always, the Sultan's private life is sacred. What you see, what you hear, remains locked within these walls. The penalty for indiscretion is death. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Then go. Prepare yourself. The interview is over." Hüseyin backs out of the chamber, maintaining the posture of respect until he is beyond the door. Then, alone in a corridor, he allows himself a moment of something that might be satisfaction, might be relief, might be simple disbelief that he has survived another precarious moment in palace politics. His new duties begin immediately. As chief steward, Hüseyin is responsible for the Sultan's most private spaces: his sleeping chamber, his bath, his private study where he retires to escape the demands of kingship. These are rooms that few people ever enter, rooms where the Sultan can, at least theoretically, relax the performance of majesty that defines his public existence. Hüseyin quickly discovers that managing these spaces requires a different set of skills than maintaining the wardrobe. He must anticipate the Sultan's needs before they are expressed. Must ensure that everything is perfect without the Sultan ever needing to notice the work involved. Must coordinate with cooks and bath attendants, perfumers and musicians, creating an environment of comfort and luxury that seems effortless. More importantly, he must manage the other eunuchs who serve in these private quarters. There are 6 of them under his supervision, and each comes with his own ambitions, his own networks of alliance and obligation. Hüseyin must somehow transform these potential rivals into a smoothly functioning team, and this requires all the diplomatic skills he has acquired over years of observation. He begins by calling a meeting, gathering the 6 eunuchs in one of the service rooms adjacent to the Sultan's chambers. "I am new to this position," he tells them, establishing from the outset that he will not pretend to know everything. "Each of you has been here longer than I have. Each of you possesses knowledge and skills that I will rely upon. I ask only for your cooperation, your honesty, and your loyalty, not to me personally, but to our shared purpose, which is the Sultan's comfort and security." It is a carefully crafted speech, balancing humility with authority, acknowledging their experience while establishing his leadership. Some of the eunuchs respond positively, seeing in Hüseyin's approach a promising change from the previous chief steward's more autocratic style. Others remain skeptical, watching and waiting to see if his actions match his words. Hüseyin proves himself through work. He rises earlier than any of them, stays later, demonstrates through action that he will not ask anything of them that he is unwilling to do himself. When problems arise, a conflict over scheduling, a shortage of supplies, a misunderstanding with the palace kitchens, he handles them quietly and efficiently, seeking solutions rather than assigning blame. Slowly, grudgingly in some cases, the other eunuchs accept his leadership. The team begins to function more smoothly, and this, in turn, comes to the Sultan's attention. Suleiman is not a man who expresses appreciation easily or often. He has been raised to accept perfect service as his due, to notice imperfection but take perfection for granted. But one evening, as Hüseyin is overseeing the preparation of the royal bath, the Sultan speaks to him directly. "You are the new chief steward," Suleiman says. "It is not quite a question." "Yes, my lord. The bath is perfect tonight, as it has been every night since you assumed your duties. It is my purpose to serve, my lord." The Sultan regards him with eyes that have seen everything, that trust nothing completely. "What is your name?" "Hüseyin, my lord." "Hüseyin, you are young for such responsibility." "I am 30 years of age, my lord." In fact, Hüseyin is not entirely certain of his exact age. The years of his childhood, before his transformation, have blurred in memory, but 30 seems approximately correct. "Young," the Sultan repeats. "But perhaps that is good. Young men still feel they have something to prove. This keeps them diligent. I live only to prove worthy of your trust, my lord." Suleiman nods, dismissing him with a gesture. But as Hüseyin withdraws, he catches a glimpse of something that might be approval in the Sultan's expression. This brief exchange marks a turning point. The Sultan now knows his name, recognizes his face. In the palace, where thousands serve and most remain anonymous, this level of recognition is significant. It means that Hüseyin has crossed an invisible threshold, has entered the innermost circle of those who personally serve the empire's master. With recognition comes privilege, but also danger. Hüseyin is now visible to the palace's power players, noticed by those who constantly assess who is rising and who is falling. Some see him as a potential ally, others as a potential threat. He receives subtle approaches, carefully worded invitations to align himself with this faction or that. Hüseyin navigates these approaches with extreme caution. He accepts no gifts that might create obligation. He makes no promises that might be later used against him. He maintains a posture of perfect neutrality, serving the Sultan and only the Sultan, refusing to be drawn into the plots and counterplots that swirl constantly through the palace corridors. This neutrality is itself a kind of power. Because he aligns with no faction, all factions must treat him carefully. Because he shows no ambition. Beyond his current role, he poses no threat to those above him. He becomes a safe confidant, someone who can be trusted with information precisely because he has no apparent motive to use that information for personal advantage. Years pass. Hüseyin serves 3 sultans, surviving the dangerous transitions of power that follow each royal death. He witnesses palace revolutions, the rise and fall of grand viziers, military campaigns that expand or contract the empire's borders. Through all of this, he remains a constant presence in the private chambers of power, invisible yet indispensable. His financial situation improves dramatically. As chief steward, his salary is substantial, and he continues to save most of it. He invests in property in Constantinople, buying houses that he rents to merchants and officials. He becomes, by any measure, wealthy, a strange status for a man who is technically a slave. But wealth brings its own complications. It makes him more valuable, yes, but also more vulnerable. There are always those who might benefit from his downfall, who might seize his property if he were to be executed or exiled. Hüseyin protects himself by distributing his wealth. Strategically, making gifts to powerful officials, endowing mosques and schools, creating a network of people who have reason to want him to survive. One aspect of Hüseyin's life that few in the palace fully understand is his relationship with the other eunuchs. They form, in a sense, a society within the larger palace society, a community of men who share a peculiar fate and the understanding that comes from that shared experience. Eunuchs, Hüseyin has learned, are both profoundly isolated and deeply connected. Isolated because they stand apart from the normal structures of family and reproduction that organize most human communities. Connected because only another eunuch can truly understand what it means to live as they do, suspended between categories, belonging fully to neither male nor female worlds yet operating intimately in both. There are hierarchies among them, of course, determined by position and seniority. The Kisler Agassi, the chief black eunuch who administers the harem, wields more power than almost any other palace official. including many of the empire's governors and generals. Below him are ranks of black eunuchs who serve the imperial women, managing the complex world of the harem with its hundreds of residents. Concubines and wives, mothers and daughters, servants and slaves, all female, all dependent on the eunuchs for their contact with the outside world. The white eunuchs, like Hüseyin, operate primarily in the male spaces of the palace, but there is interaction between the two groups, overlap in their responsibilities, and sometimes rivalry between them. The black eunuchs jealously guard their privileged access to the harem and the power this gives them. The white eunuchs maintain that their service to the sultan directly, rather than indirectly through the women, gives them superior status. Hüseyin carefully avoids these rivalries. He cultivates friendships with eunuchs from both groups, recognizing that alliances across factional lines can be particularly valuable. One of his closest friends is Mehmed, a black eunuch who serves as deputy to the Kisler Agassi. Mehmed is perhaps 10 years older than Hüseyin, a tall man with dark skin and intelligent eyes, who was brought to Constantinople from somewhere in East Africa as a young boy. Like Hüseyin, he has risen through ability and discretion. Unlike Hüseyin, he enjoys the political intrigue of palace life, relishes the game of power for its own sake. "You are too cautious," Mehmed tells Hüseyin one evening as they walk together in one of the palace gardens. "You have the sultan's trust. You could accomplish so much more if you were willing to use your position." "I use my position to serve," Hüseyin replies. "That is its purpose. Serving yourself and serving the sultan are not mutually exclusive," Mehmed argues. "The empire runs on patronage, on networks of mutual obligation. You could build such a network. You could place your people in important positions, create a faction loyal to you. This is how power works. It is also how one attracts enemies. You already have enemies whether you acknowledge them or not. Every position like yours creates envy. The question is whether you defend yourself actively or passively." These conversations challenge Hüseyin, force him to examine his own choices and motivations. Is his neutrality wisdom or cowardice? Is his caution prudence or simply fear? He does not know, cannot be certain. But he continues as he has, trusting that the path of discretion is ultimately safer than the path of ambition. Still, Mehmed's friendship is valuable, and not just for the strategic information it provides. Mehmed understands, as few others can, what it means to live as Hüseyin lives. They can speak openly to each other about things they would never mention to anyone else. The phantom pains that sometimes still trouble them, the dreams of what might have been if their lives had taken different paths, the strange mix of bitterness and acceptance that characterizes their relationship with their own bodies. "Do you ever regret it?" Hüseyin asks one night. "What was done to us?" Mehmed is silent for a long moment, before answering. "How can one regret what one had no power to prevent?" Regret implies choice. We had no choice. But if we had been given a choice, we would have chosen to live, Mehmed says firmly. That is the only choice that mattered. We were boys. We wanted to survive. Everything else follows from that. It is a pragmatic answer, perhaps the only answer that makes sense. Hüseyin accepts it, though part of him continues to wonder about the life he might have lived if history had been kinder, if empire had not required his sacrifice. Another aspect of eunuch life that outsiders often misunderstand is the question of sexuality. The assumption is that castration eliminates sexual desire entirely, but this is not quite accurate. The reality is more complex, more individual. Some eunuchs, particularly those castrated very young, seem to experience little sexual feeling. Others retain desire even without the physical means to act on it in conventional ways. Still others develop different forms of intimacy, different ways of expressing affection and connection. Hüseyin finds that his own experience falls somewhere in the middle of this spectrum. He feels attraction, sometimes, though it is muted, more aesthetic than urgently physical. He can appreciate beauty without needing to possess it. And he has learned that intimacy can take many forms: shared conversation, trusted confidence, the quiet companionship of those who understand one's circumstances without needing explanation. There are, he knows, eunuchs who form romantic attachments to one another, relationships that are tolerated as long as they remain discreet. The palace, for all its rigid hierarchy, also contains spaces of flexibility, zones where human need finds ways to express itself outside official categories. Hüseyin himself has never formed such an attachment, but he does not judge those who do. Survival takes many forms, and loneliness is its own kind of suffering. What sustains Hüseyin, more than anything, is his work. The sense of competence, of mastery over his assigned domain, provides a satisfaction that partially compensates for what he has lost. He has become extraordinary at what he does, and there is pride in this, even if it is pride in service rather than independent achievement. He knows the Sultan's habits better than the Sultan knows them himself. He can anticipate moods, prepare the environment to soothe or stimulate as the situation requires. He manages crises with such efficiency that they seem never to have occurred. The Sultan's private life runs with the precision of a well-made clock, and Hüseyin is the master clockmaker, adjusting gears and springs invisible to the casual observer. This expertise gives him a kind of security. As long as he remains useful, as long as he makes himself indispensable, he is safe. Or as safe as anyone can be in a place where power shifts constantly, where today's favorite can become tomorrow's prisoner. 20 years after his arrival at the palace, Hüseyin receives an appointment that represents the apex of a white eunuch's career. He is named to serve within the harem itself, assigned to coordinate between the Sultan's private chambers and the women's quarters. It is a position of extraordinary trust, requiring him to move between male and female worlds, to serve as a channel of communication between the Sultan and his mother, the Valide Sultan, who is perhaps the most powerful woman in the empire. The harem is not what popular imagination has made it. It is not a brothel or a pleasure palace in any simple sense. It is the private residence of the imperial family, carefully guarded, highly structured, operating according to elaborate protocols that govern every aspect of life within its walls. At the harem's apex stands the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who exercises authority over all the women within these walls. Below her are the Sultan's wives, official spouses whose children are legitimate heirs to the throne. Then come the concubines, ranked according to their favor with the Sultan and whether they have borne him children. There are also the Sultan's daughters and sisters, women of the imperial family who live in the harem under the protection and control of its hierarchies. And managing all of this, controlling access and maintaining order, is the core of black eunuchs under their chief, the Kisler Agassi. The black eunuchs are the harem's administrators, its guards, its connection to the outside world. Nothing enters or leaves without their knowledge and approval. Hüseyin's new role places him in a delicate position. He serves the Sultan directly, but he must work closely with the black eunuchs and show proper deference to the Valide Sultan, who may have political interests that do not perfectly align with her son's. He must navigate competing claims on the Sultan's attention, manage the logistics of visits between the Sultan and various women, and maintain absolute discretion about everything he observes. His first meeting with the Valide Sultan is intimidating. She is perhaps 60 years old, a woman who was herself once a concubine but rose to the highest position a woman can achieve in the empire. She has survived decades of palace intrigue, has seen her son ascend to the throne, and has consolidated her own power until she rivals the Grand Vizier in influence. "You are Hüseyin," she says, studying him with eyes that miss nothing. "The chief steward whom my son trusts. I am honored by that trust, my lady. Trust is earned, not given. You will coordinate between my son's chambers and my household. You will carry messages, arrange visits, ensure that communication between us flows smoothly. Do you understand what this really means?" "I believe so, my lady. It means you will be privy to conversations and decisions that could shift the balance of power in this empire. It means you will know things that others would kill to know. And it means you must be absolutely, unfailingly loyal to the Sultan and to me. Any hint of betrayal, any whisper that you have shared what you should not share, and your life ends. Immediately, without question. Is this clear?" "Perfectly clear, my lady." She nods, satisfied. "Good. You may serve me coffee now. I wish to observe your manner." It is a test, Hüseyin realizes, a way of assessing him beyond words. He prepares and serves the coffee according to the elaborate protocol. The right temperature, the right sweetness, presented in the proper way at the proper moment. The Valide Sultan sips and watches him, and something in her severe expression softens slightly. "You will do," she says. "Begin your duties tomorrow." Over the following months, Hüseyin learns to navigate the treacherous currents of harem politics. He discovers that the women's quarters are in their own way as complex and dangerous as any male domain, perhaps more so because the stakes are so high. The position of favorite concubine can elevate a woman from slavery to enormous wealth and influence. But favor is fickle, and a woman who falls from grace can find herself exiled or worse. The Valide Sultan manages these rivalries with skill born of experience. She understands that her power depends on maintaining her son's trust while also ensuring that no single concubine gains too much influence over him. She uses Hüseyin as one of her tools, sending him with messages that subtly guide the Sultan's attention, arranging encounters that serve her political purposes. Hüseyin finds himself in the strange position of being a broker of intimacy. He schedules the Sultan's visits to various concubines, coordinates with the bath attendants and dressmakers who prepare the women, ensures that everything is arranged to maximize the possibility of successful encounters. It is oddly clinical work, romance reduced to logistics, but it is critical to the palace's functioning that he also observes, over time, the genuine affection that develops between the Sultan and certain women. One concubine, Hürrem, captures the Sultan's attention so completely that she becomes, effectively, his favorite wife despite her slave origins. She is intelligent, ambitious, and politically astute, and she forms an alliance with the Valide Sultan that shifts the balance of power in the harem. Hüseyin watches this alliance form and strengthen, understanding that he is witnessing something historically significant. Hürrem will eventually be freed and married to the Sultan, an almost unprecedented elevation for a concubine. Her sons will be positioned as potential heirs. And throughout all of this, Hüseyin will serve as one of the channels of communication that makes this transformation possible. His role gives him a unique perspective on the women of the harem. He sees them not as the fantasized objects of Orientalist imagination, but as complex individuals navigating extraordinarily constrained circumstances. They are mothers protecting their children, politicians advancing their interests, prisoners making the best of their captivity, survivors adapting to survive. Some of them treat him with kindness, recognizing perhaps a fellow creature trapped by circumstance. Others view him with contempt or pity, seeing in his castrated state a reminder of their own powerlessness. Still others simply use him instrumentally, as a tool to achieve their purposes. Hüseyin accepts all of these attitudes with equanimity. He is long past the point of needing validation from others. He knows what he is, knows the value and the limitations of his position. In his 50th year, Hüseyin begins to write. Not official documents. He has been writing those for decades, preparing reports and records as part of his duties. But something else. A private manuscript, composed in the hours between sunset and sleep, exploring questions that have occupied his mind throughout his long service. What is a good life? What constitutes virtue when one's life has been so constrained, so shaped by forces beyond one's control? Can there be dignity in servitude? Can one find meaning in a life defined by loss? These are not abstract, philosophical questions for Hüseyin. They are urgent, personal, the substance of his own existence. And as he writes, he discovers that he has developed answers, a philosophy of service that has sustained him through decades in the palace. Service, he writes, is not inherently degrading. On the contrary, service performed with excellence and integrity can be a form of mastery. The servant who knows his craft perfectly, who executes his duties flawlessly, exercises a kind of power that the served person depends upon. The Sultan may command, but Hüseyin makes that command reality. Without his competence, the Sultan's wishes remain mere wishes. Moreover, there is freedom in having clear purpose. The servant knows what is expected, knows how to measure success. There is no existential anxiety about meaning or direction. One simply serves, and serving well is its own reward. Hüseyin writes about the peculiar position of eunuchs, standing outside the normal categories of male and female, slave and free. This outsider status, he suggests, provides a unique vantage point. The eunuch can see things that others, trapped in their own categorical constraints, cannot see. He can move between worlds, understand multiple perspectives, precisely because he fully belongs to none of them. As to the question of what was taken from him, his manhood, his capacity to father children, his place in the normal progression of human life, Hüseyin writes with a clarity that has taken decades to achieve. Yes, something was taken. Yes, it was unjust. Yes, if he could have chosen differently, he might have. But none of this changes the reality of what is. And one must live in reality, not in fantasy about what might have been. The Buddhist monks he has learned from conversations with a scholar who visited the palace speak of non-attachment as a path to peace. Perhaps his castration was, in its brutal way, a kind of enforced non-attachment. He cannot have a wife, children, a family line extending into the future. And in not having these things, he is freed from the anxieties that accompany them. He need not worry about his children's futures, need not compete in the marriage market, need not struggle to build a dynasty. His life is simpler, in a way, for all that has been taken from it. This is not resignation, Hüseyin writes. It is acceptance. And acceptance, properly understood, is a form of power. It is the power to see clearly, to act effectively within one's actual circumstances rather than being paralyzed by longing for different circumstances. He writes also about loyalty, that cardinal virtue of the palace servant. Loyalty, Hüseyin suggests, is rational. The sultan provides protection, sustenance, purpose. In return, the servant provides service. This is a fair exchange, a contract that both parties honor. But more than this, loyalty creates stability in a chaotic world. By binding oneself to something larger, whether a person, an institution, an ideal, one gains a foundation, a place to stand. These writings are never intended for public circulation. They are private meditations, a way of making sense of his own life. But Mehmed, his friend, discovers them one day and reads them with fascination. You should show these to the scholars at the mosque, Mehmed says. These are serious thoughts, worthy of wider consideration. They are the thoughts of a eunuch, Hüseyin replies. Who would take them seriously? Anyone who reads them seriously, Mehmed insists. You have lived a life that few others have lived. You have observations that few others could make. This is valuable. Hüseyin is skeptical, but eventually, through Mehmed's connections, his manuscript finds its way to a scholar who specializes in philosophy and theology. This scholar, impressed by the thoughtfulness of the writing, arranges for portions of it to be copied and circulated among his colleagues. To Hüseyin's surprise, his writings generate interest. Here, scholars discover, is a philosophical perspective on servitude and constraint written from the inside by someone who has lived these realities for decades. His thoughts on acceptance and dignity, on finding meaning within limitation, resonate with thinkers struggling with similar questions in their own contexts. Hüseyin finds himself, late in life, with a reputation as something of a philosopher eunuch, a sage who has achieved wisdom through suffering and service. It is a strange status for a palace servant, but the palace has always contained strange juxtapositions of status and role. The sultan, hearing of his chief steward's scholarly reputation, summons him for a conversation. I am told you are a philosopher. The sultan says with something that might be amusement. I have written some thoughts, my lord. Nothing worthy of such a grand title. Read me something. I wish to hear these thoughts that have impressed the scholars. Hüseyin retrieves his manuscript and reads a passage about the nature of power, how those who appear to hold it are often constrained by it, how the powerful depend on the supposedly powerless, how hierarchy is a mutual construction rather than a simple relation of domination. The sultan listens carefully. When Hüseyin finishes, there is a long silence. You suggest, the sultan finally says, that I depend on you as much as you depend on me. I would not presume, my lord, to... No, do not retreat into formality. You have written it. Defend it. Hüseyin takes a breath, choosing his words carefully. My lord, you could execute me tomorrow and replace me within days. In that sense, I am entirely dependent on your favor. But you depend on me to manage your private life with competence and discretion. You depend on me to create the conditions in which you can rest, think, make the decisions that govern an empire. We serve different functions, but both functions are necessary. This is what I mean by mutual construction. The Sultan considers this, and something like respect appears in his expression. Continue your writing, Hüseyin, but remember, philosophy is acceptable in private. In public, you remain what you have always been, my servant. I understand, my lord, and I am content with that. And in truth, he is. The recognition is pleasant, but it does not define him. What defines him is the work, the daily practice of service performed with excellence, the quiet satisfaction of a life lived according to principles he has discovered through experience. Hüseyin serves 4 sultans in total, witnessing the transitions of power that mark the passage of decades. Each transition is dangerous, a time when favorites of the old regime can suddenly find themselves disposable, when new rulers clear away the structures of the past to make room for their own preferences. But Hüseyin survives each transition in part because he has made himself indispensable, and in part because he threatens no one. He has no children to advance, no faction to promote, no ambition beyond his current position. New sultans, evaluating their inherited staff, consistently conclude that Hüseyin can be trusted to serve them as faithfully as he served their predecessors. Now, in his 70s, an extraordinary age in an era when most men are lucky to reach 50, Hüseyin has become an institution in himself. He is one of the longest-serving palace officials, a living repository of tradition and practice. Young eunuchs come to him for advice and instruction. Even senior officials treat him with a deference that goes beyond his formal rank. His body has aged in the particular way that eunuch bodies age. He remains tall and relatively slender, lacking the muscular deterioration that often accompanies male aging. His face is smooth, nearly unlined, giving him a peculiarly ageless quality. But his joints ache, his back troubles him, and the stamina that once seemed boundless has noticeably diminished. The current sultan, recognizing Hüseyin's age and service, offers to reduce his duties, to grant him a kind of semi-retirement within the palace. But Hüseyin declines. "My lord, I am what I do," he explains. "If I am not serving, I am not anything. I would prefer to continue until I can no longer perform my duties to the standard they require." The Sultan accepts this, understanding perhaps that for men like Hüseyin, purpose and life are inseparable. Hüseyin continues his work, though at a slightly reduced pace. He trains a younger eunuch, Selim, to eventually succeed him, passing on the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime of service. Selim is intelligent and eager, reminds Hüseyin of himself at that age, before experience taught him caution, before he learned that survival often requires invisibility. "You will make mistakes," Hüseyin tells Selim during one of their training sessions. "Everyone does. The key is to make mistakes that can be corrected, not mistakes that are fatal." "How does one know the difference?" Selim asks. "Experience," Hüseyin replies, which is another way of saying that you learn by surviving your mistakes long enough to recognize them. He shares with Selim the wisdom of decades. How to read the subtle signals that indicate shifts in power, how to navigate rivalries without becoming entangled in them, how to make oneself useful without making oneself vulnerable, how to serve with dignity while maintaining the humility that service requires. One evening, as they sit together in the garden after evening prayer, Selim asks the question that Hüseyin knew would eventually come. "Do you regret your life?" Hüseyin considers carefully before answering. "I regret the circumstances that brought me here. I regret the loss that was inflicted on me without my consent. But I do not regret what I have made of those circumstances. I have lived with purpose. I have served faithfully. I have achieved a kind of mastery in my domain. These are not small things. But you could have had a family, children, a normal life." Hüseyin shakes his head. "Perhaps, but I might also have been a peasant dying young in a forgotten village. I might have been a soldier killed in some distant war. I might have been 1,000 different things, most of them worse than what I actually became. We cannot compare our actual lives to imagined alternatives. We can only live the life we have as well as we can." Selim absorbs this in silence, and Hüseyin wonders if the young man understands, or if understanding only comes with time and experience. As the years pass, Hüseyin finds himself increasingly drawn to reflection. He adds to his manuscript, writing now, not about philosophy in the abstract but about memory, about the strange experience of looking back on a life so unlike most lives. He writes about the boy he was, that frightened child taken from his village. That boy seems almost like a different person now, separated by such distance of time and transformation that Hüseyin can barely remember what it felt like to be him. But sometimes, in dreams, that boy returns, whole, unmutilated, standing at a crossroads that still contains all possibilities. He writes about his fellow eunuchs, those who did not survive, who succumbed to the surgery or to disease or to the various dangers of palace life. He honors their memory, acknowledges that his own survival contains an element of luck alongside whatever skill and wisdom he might claim. He writes about the sultans he has served, the glimpses he has had of absolute power and its burdens. Power, he observes, is its own kind of prison. The sultan cannot walk freely in his own city, cannot trust easily, cannot escape the weight of responsibility for millions of lives. In a strange way, Hüseyin has been more free within his constraints than the sultans who commanded him. And he writes about the empire itself, this vast construction of administration and power, held together by structures that seem permanent but that Hüseyin knows are fragile. He has seen enough to understand that empires rise and fall, that what seems eternal is merely temporary on a longer timescale. The Ottoman Empire, for all its might, will one day decline and fall as all empires do. But knowing this does not diminish the value of serving it well while it lasts. Hüseyin is 75 when he wakes one morning and knows, with absolute certainty, that he is dying. It is not that he feels particularly worse than usual. His aches and pains are familiar companions by now. It is something else, a knowledge that comes from deep within his body, a message from that place where body and consciousness meet. He rises and performs his morning ablutions as always, prays as always, dresses in his palace robes as always. But he calls Selim to him earlier than usual. "I will not live much longer," he tells the younger eunuch. "Perhaps days, perhaps weeks, but not much more than that." Selim begins to protest, but Hüseyin stops him with a gesture. "Listen carefully. There are things you must know to serve effectively after I am gone. Arrangements that must be maintained, relationships that must be honored, protocols that may not be written down but are no less important for that." They spend the day in intense conversation, Hüseyin sharing the accumulated knowledge that cannot be found in any manual or official document. He speaks of the sultan's unspoken preferences, the Valide sultan's real priorities beneath her stated ones, the reliable allies among the other palace officials, the ones who must be watched carefully. More than anything, Hüseyin concludes, "Remember that service is not servility. Serve with excellence but maintain your dignity. You are not less than others simply because you serve them. You are different, and difference can be a form of power if properly understood." Over the following days, Hüseyin puts his affairs in order. He has accumulated considerable wealth over his decades of service, and he disposes of it carefully. Large donations go to mosques and schools. Generous gifts go to the eunuchs who have served under him. A substantial sum goes to Selim, to give him resources as he begins his own rise through the palace hierarchy. He also makes a final gift to his home village, or at least, to the village he believes was his home, for memory after so many decades is uncertain. He endows a school there, specifying that it should teach both boys and girls, that education should be available to all children regardless of status. It is a small gesture, perhaps, but one that gives him satisfaction. Something good, emerging from his loss. The Sultan, informed of Hüseyin's condition, visits him personally, an extraordinary honor that acknowledges the decades of faithful service. "You have served well," the Sultan says simply. "I have tried, my lord. Is there anything you wish? Any request I might grant as you near your end?" Hüseyin considers. There is so much he might ask for, recognition, honors, formal titles that would elevate his status even posthumously. But in the end, he asks for something simpler. "Only this, my lord, that I might be buried in the palace cemetery, among those who served as I did." that I might rest where I lived. It is granted. The Sultan stays for a few more minutes, and they talk not of state business but of small things. The garden that Hüseyin has always loved, the changes the Sultan hopes to make to the palace, the weather, and the season. It is the closest thing to friendship that their positions have ever allowed, and both men seem to recognize this moment as a kind of farewell to more than just one life. In his final days, Hüseyin receives many visitors. Eunuchs he has mentored come to pay their respects. Palace officials he has worked with over the years stop by to acknowledge his service. Even some of the women from the harem send messages, conveyed through proper channels, expressing their appreciation. Mehmed, his oldest friend, sits with him through long hours, and they reminisce about their decades in the palace, the dramas they have witnessed, the survival they have accomplished. "We did well, didn't we?" Mehmed says. "Given what was done to us, given the constraints we lived under, we made good lives. We survived." Hüseyin agrees. "And we served well. These are not small achievements." "Do you believe in an afterlife?" Mehmed asks. "Will there be justice for what was taken from us?" Hüseyin shakes his head slowly. "I don't know. I hope so, but I cannot claim certainty. What I know is that I have lived the life I was given as well as I could. If there is judgment, I can face it knowing this. His death, when it comes, is peaceful. He simply does not wake one morning, slipping away in sleep as the dawn call to prayer echoes across Constantinople. It is a good death, if any death can be called good, without pain, without fear, surrounded by the structures and routines that have defined his life." The funeral is large, attended by many palace officials and eunuchs from throughout the complex. The Sultan himself attends briefly, a mark of respect that everyone present notes and remembers. Hüseyin is buried in the palace cemetery as requested, his grave marked with a simple stone that records his name, his years of service, and a single line he had requested: "He served faithfully." Years after Hüseyin's death, Selim, now himself an old man serving as chief steward to yet another sultan, discovers Hüseyin's manuscript. He has kept it safe, but only now, reading it again with the perspective of his own decades of service, does he fully appreciate its wisdom. Selim arranges for the manuscript to be properly copied and preserved, adding his own annotations and reflections. It becomes a kind of manual for palace eunuchs passed down through generations, guide not just to protocol but to philosophy, to the question of how one lives a good life within the most constraining of circumstances. The manuscript travels beyond the palace walls, finds its way to scholars and thinkers throughout the Islamic world. Here, they say, is a voice from an unexpected source, offering insights into questions of power and servitude, autonomy and constraint, loss and acceptance. Some readers focus on the practical wisdom, the advice about navigating palace politics, about maintaining dignity in service. Others are more interested in the philosophical dimensions, the reflections on what makes a life meaningful, on how one finds purpose when so many normal sources of purpose have been denied. And still others see in Hüseyin's writings a broader message about the human condition. Are we not all, in various ways, constrained by circumstances not of our choosing? Do we not all face the question of how to live well within the limitations that define us? Hüseyin's particular constraints were dramatic and visible, but perhaps they differ only in degree, not in kind, from the constraints that shape every human life. The Ottoman Empire, as Hüseyin predicted, eventually declines and falls. The palace ceases to function as it once did. The practice of employing eunuchs gradually ends, recognized eventually as a violation of human dignity rather than a natural feature of imperial administration. But Hüseyin's manuscript survives these changes. It becomes a historical document, a window into a vanished world, but also something more, a meditation on universal themes of suffering and adaptation, loss and meaning, constraint and freedom that in the 21st century, scholars studying gender and sexuality, power and servitude, the construction of identity, and the possibilities of human resilience, still turn to Hüseyin's words. Here, they find, is a voice that cannot be easily categorized, that stands outside the usual frameworks of analysis, that offers insights precisely because of its peculiar position at the intersection of so many categories. Some modern readers struggle with the text, uncomfortable with Hüseyin's acceptance of his circumstances, wishing he had raged more against the injustice done to him. They want a story of resistance, of rebellion, of refusal to accept dehumanization. But Hüseyin's story is not that story. It is a different kind of story about finding dignity in impossible circumstances, about creating meaning when normal sources of meaning are denied, about the particular kind of strength required not to fight what cannot be changed but to adapt, to survive, to build a life within whatever space is available. Whether this is wisdom or merely rationalization, empowerment or self-deception, readers must judge for themselves. What is clear is that Hüseyin lived, served, and ultimately found a way to see his own life as valuable despite everything that had been taken from him. He transformed a position that might have been purely victimization into something more complex, a role that, while still unjust in its origins, nevertheless allowed for skill, for dignity, for a kind of achievement. The boy who was taken from his village, who suffered mutilation and transformation, who spent his entire adult life in service to others. That boy became a man who influenced emperors, who shaped the hidden workings of power, who accumulated wisdom about the human condition in its most constrained forms, and who, in the end, could say without irony that he had lived well. Whether we judge this harshly or compassionately, with admiration or discomfort, says as much about us as it does about Hüseyin himself. The night deepens. The story is told. Somewhere in Constantinople, now Istanbul, the palace still stands, though its function has long since changed. The dormitories where eunuchs once slept are empty. The gardens where they once walked are open to tourists. The chambers where they exercised their peculiar power have been transformed into museums. But the questions Hüseyin grappled with remain. What makes a life meaningful? How do we find dignity when dignity is denied? What is the relationship between freedom and constraint, between autonomy and servitude? How do we live well in a world that may not be organized to allow us to flourish? These are not questions with simple answers. They are questions that each generation must answer for itself, in its own context, according to its own values. Hüseyin's answer was service. Perfect service, performed with excellence and integrity, as a path to meaning and dignity. It may not be the answer that speaks to everyone, but it was his answer, arrived at through decades of reflection and practice, and it sustained him through a life that might otherwise have been unbearable. And perhaps that is enough. Not a perfect life, not a life freely chosen, but a life lived with intention and purpose, a life that became more than the sum of its constraints. The story of one eunuch in the Ottoman court. A story of loss and adaptation. Of constraint and creativity. Of suffering and wisdom. Of service and dignity, and ultimately, of what it means to be human, even when humanity itself has been questioned and constrained. Rest now. The Odyssey is complete. Until the next journey into the past, sleep well.